was in my comment section the other day, and someone added a comment talking about that you can't teach people how to listen. That's something I've been thinking about for a while as well, and I was triggered, and I thought, let's make a video on this thing, this skill that we develop that's called listening. All right. It's not easy to teach this skill, but I think it can be taught. I mean, not directly, but there are some ways, some tools that you can use to develop the skill. But indeed, it is a skill that all of us need, and most of us develop without noticing, but we all need it, especially to make beats, right? Any musician needs it. I think that's one of the things that sets apart musicians as well, is the listening skill, how well they can capture a sound, how well they can put a sound together. That's down to listening. I think especially beginners, that skill isn't developed, of course, because they're at the beginning stages of beat making. So, it's normal that you haven't developed that listening skill. But yeah, it's very noticeable at the beginning stages of beat making. And I think it's probably one of the most important skills that we can teach. When we get to these YouTube videos where we try to teach all the techniques, how to chop, how to find a sample, whatever it is, how to filter, compress, they tell you the physical aspects of a technique. But if you don't have a listening skill developed, so if your listening isn't developed, most of these techniques won't make any sense to you, right? And that's why a lot of the times you see people asking, what are you going to sample? Where do I get samples? You get samples from everywhere, but the real question that these people will need to be asking is, how can I develop my listening skills so I know what I want to search for? We need to learn this more than we need to learn how to sidechain, how to EQ, how to compress, how to everything. If you don't have a listening skill developed well enough, then most likely you're going to be stuck making beats because you don't know where to go. One of the things about the listening skill is that once you have it, you know where to go with your music. And most of the times what you'll notice is that people put samples together. People that don't have that skill developed, that listening skill developed, they'll put samples together. They can put the drums, they can put the sample, but then it feels like it's not finished. And most of the time it's because the mix is bad, because you don't know where to take these sounds, these samples. You don't know how to put them together. And that comes from listening. That comes from acquiring this skill of listening. Because if you have it, you know where you're going to go with these sounds, right? I've been giving out lessons for a while. I'm in contact with people. They want to learn about the MPC. They want to learn about beat making techniques and all of that. And I noticed that there's always something missing. And sometimes I try to teach a lot of these techniques to people, but what I've come to realize after a while, after teaching all these lessons that I have, is that there's something missing in all of them. And I'm starting to think that it is that listening skill. It is that they don't know where to take their music, right? They don't know how to EQ their songs, not because they lack on the information of what an EQ is and how an EQ works, but they lack a direction and they lack in confidence. And that's what listening, a good listening skill gives you. It gives you confidence when you are mixing your songs, you're mixing your music. You know where you want to go because you have that sound inside of your head. You know how to achieve that sound. So I think that's the big difference between a guy that's been making beats for a long time and a guy that's starting right now, is that listening skill. A guy that has been making beats for a while, he knows where to take his music. He knows how to filter, how to volume, all his drums, and he knows where he's going to take his music. A guy that's just starting has no idea how to get there. He doesn't know the importance of volume. He doesn't understand that relation between different volumes can create a better mix. Most of the guys that don't have a listening skill, they stumble on effects all the time. They just add effects into the beat, thinking that the effects will give them something that the volume, that is such a simple thing, is not going to give them. If you want to get good at making beats, yes, you can learn all the techniques you want, but the techniques alone will not give you what you want. The listening skill is way more important than any technique, all right? If you have a good listening skill and just with volume, you can make great beats with that alone, right? That listening skill is the thing that really gives you a preference into sound, because you've acquired it. You've acquired that skill. You know what works for you. You've been listening to a lot of samples. You know what works for you. You know what doesn't work for you. So that skill will help you not just on the mix, but it will help you to pick the right kicks, the right samples. It will also help you to place these kicks in the mix, place the hi-hats, place all the samples in the mix. Those listening skills is what drives you to that final product with intention and with confidence, all right? So most of the times when you don't have that confidence, you put all the sounds together, everything's in place, the kick's in place, everything's chopped correctly, everything's on the grid, everything seems to be working, but there's a lack of sound. Like, you don't know how to still achieve that sound. There's something that's missing. That's that listening skill. How do you get these things? You get by listening. This is one of the skills people don't want to learn so much, or they just want to skip through because it takes you a long time to acquire. And it's not something that you go on YouTube and you search for, oh, it's done that way. It's not something that's done that way. It's something that you take over time, years. I'm still developing mine. And you'll always be developing that skill, but it takes time for you to develop that skill. It's critical listening, right? You got to analyze other people's music. This is how you develop your skill. You analyze music, analyze your favorite producers, your favorite musicians, analyze them, see how they're doing. Listen and speak to yourself while you're analyzing music. You speak to yourself. You might say something, wow, that kick is really low in volume, but it works so well. I'm going to try that next time. Or maybe that snare. So you got to pick apart everything that's in the mix. You got to have critical listening. You got to analyze everything that's in the mix. All right? So you got to go and say, wow, DJ Premier, he chops samples that way. So there's a lot of small cuts. And he doesn't use many samples. So you analyze all these things, right? And you see how he places the bass in the mix. Wow, the bass is really low in volume. Actually, the kick doesn't have a lot of bass. You analyze these things and you say these things to yourself, and then you try to do that at home. Talk to yourself about the music that you're listening. Analyze the music. Do this over and over again for years until you have your own sounds. Another thing that can help you as well are reference tracks. You hear this a lot on YouTube. I don't use reference tracks at all. I rather just analyze music. That's what I do normally. But reference tracks can help you as well with your mix. So you just grab someone else's song that you love and you have your beats and you're like, all right, this track right here has hi-hats really loud. Maybe I'm going to do that here. Then the samples are really low. Okay, I'm going to lower the level there. And then you you EQ everything to make the snare sound as close as possible. You use reference tracks for that. And if you do this long enough, you'll come to that sound that you love, right? And you'll understand what makes a snare sound the way that you want a snare to sound, because you did it so long, and then you start to get confident at that, and eventually you'll create that skill that you so needed, which is that listening skill, all right? So yeah, and while I analyze music, I tend to really look at everything, right? I look at how the mix sits, right? If I really love a song, I straight away look at the snare. Where's the snare? Oh, the snare is really low in volume. It feels really good that way. I might try that. How's the kick? How's the bass sounding? How's the stereo feel? Where's the hi-hats? Where's the bass? Oh, filter out the individual sounds of the beat, and then see how they're all working together. Understand the difference in volume between all of them. See how they sound. Do they have a lot of high frequencies, or do they have, or they seem like they're cut? Or how's the bass sounding? Does it have a lot of bass or not? What's the most prominent sound in the beat? All of these things, right? If you try to learn techniques without this skill, sometimes what happens is that all these techniques make no sense to you and you're still lost. I see people say, like, how do you find samples? Or normally I pick jazz records. Yeah, but what jazz records? Or this jazz record. Oh, but what song? This song. And how do you chop it? I chop it like that. But how does it work? Like, you can tell everything to a person. You can even put a beat together with them and they still don't understand how you did it, because they don't understand that it comes from that skill of listening. So that you got that skill that you've developed, that you already know that if you listen to a certain thing, you already know that that's going to work. And I can do this to it by using these techniques. But it comes from that developed skill of listening. So you listen to that sample and you know, all right, I can do that to that sample. I can, chop it right there, and that's going to work really nice. And because that person that is starting doesn't have it developed, doesn't have that skill developed, he is not hearing what I'm hearing. He's hearing something else. And I already know, I'm listening to the sample, I already know where I'm going to chop it. That person doesn't know anything about the chop that I'm listening to, right? So because these skills I've developed throughout the years. So, all these techniques that you can learn on YouTube mean nothing if you don't develop your listening skills. So do that. Do that. And not just for volumes and things. Do that for hip hop. So when you're listening to boom bap, pay attention to how the kicks are placed, and try to repeat that yourself. That you can develop your skills not just for the colors and textures and mixes and EQing and all of that, but also for groove, right? So pay attention to the groove as well. That can be a great way for you to get better at making drum loops as well. Pay attention to that. Talk to yourself. How's the loop being played? Okay, there's a steady snare. All right, there's a steady hi-hat. And the only thing here is just the kick. The kick is just doing boom, ba-boom, boom. So the kick isn't doing much. So this is very simple. And it still works really well. Why does it work? Oh, maybe it's because the hi-hat has a bit more groove. Maybe it's a double hi-hat and it's creating. Or maybe it's because of the swing here that is or maybe it's because the relation between the samples and the drums. The samples are low in volume, making the drums more prominent. Maybe that's it. So you got to study these things. You got to study the relation between the sounds, how the sounds affect each other. I feel like a broken record, but volume is the most important thing. With volume, you can get great mixes. Make sure you use volume, all right? So that's it. Develop your skill. Analyze music. Try it at home in your own beats. And most likely by the end of the year, give it a year or two, and you'll have great listening skills as well. So develop those. You need it to make music, all right? And not just to make music, but to pick the right samples, pick the right kicks, snares, everything, all right? Do that. You need it, all right? So peace. Have a great weekend. See you next video. Bye.